Welcome to Berlin, class, and welcome to the 6th week of our sports psychology adventure together. Well, I'm in here right now, a beautiful Berlin. You can see right behind me is the beautiful Brandenburg Gate here in Berlin. And for those of you who know your history, you will recognize it as being a significant part of what was once the Berlin Wall, splitting East Germany and West Germany, East Berlin and West Berlin. So on the 13th of August 1961, the Berlin Wall was erected, essentially splitting this country in two. Excitingly though, on the 9th of November in 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. And I remember it very well because I was a student athlete at Clemson University in 1989, and my roommate at the time was Michael Radzawinski, a very successful German athlete. And he had been a part of pulling that wall down along with his friends and family, and it was a very exciting time for Germany and for Michael and his family. Now, how did that influence sport? You're probably thinking, well, it influenced sport in a major way because with the Berlin Wall coming down and the unification of Germany, in the early 1990s, we start to see a unified German team participating at the Olympic Games and at World Championships in every sport. Well, Germany then, of course, became an even bigger power on the international stage in athletics and every sport you can possibly think of. And they continue to be one of the top 4 or 5 teams on the Olympic Games medals table at every Olympiad. So a very exciting time for the German people, and Germany continues to be very much a world power. Well, why am I here? Why am I in Berlin, Germany? Well, yesterday we had the 38th running of the Berlin Marathon, and in fact, even though it's kind of quiet right now, there were 40,000 athletes pouring through the Brandenburg Gate on their way to the finish line yesterday. A lot of very elite athletes were using this race as a chance to get closer to the Olympic qualifying time, and indeed, about 50, just over 50 men and women did successfully achieve the very difficult Olympic qualifying time for London next year. Well, I brought a couple of athletes here myself as we tried to get closer to that Olympic qualifying time, and in fact, I got to pace one of the Hong Kong athletes, Chao Qinyan, and she had her first ever sub 250 marathon, which again is very close to that Olympic qualifying time, and so we have a plan now to attack a couple of races in the spring to try and secure the Olympic qualifying, which is very, very high on her bucket list. One of the funnest assignments for me to read in this class so far has been your bucket list. And I noticed that many of you in the class had running a marathon as one of the items on your lists. Well, there is no better experience than running a marathon with 35 or 40,000 other people. And Berlin is a great location. All the way along the course, there are people screaming and playing musical instruments and cheering the athletes, and it certainly helped. Many of the athletes achieved great times yesterday. The world record went yesterday. Patrick Macau from Kenya ran 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 38 seconds. To break Haile Gebrselassie record. The Ethiopian had the record at 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 59 seconds, so 21 seconds off the world record yesterday. The women's race was also won by a Kenyan, Florence Kiplagat, and she ran 2 hours and 19 minutes. So some very fast times on this course. And there are a few sports where you really need the power of the mind to get you through the last 45 minutes than in a marathon. So Patrick Macau had to run the last 12K completely alone and ended up winning this race by over 4 minutes. And obviously that required significant mental toughness and the ability to really set aside and disassociate yourself from the pain that I'm sure he was experiencing running that fast. And to put it in perspective, how many of you in class can run a 440 mile? Maybe not many of you. How many of you can run a 440 mile 26 times? Well, that's what the young Kenyan athlete did yesterday, so a phenomenal performance. Well, where are we in the class right now? We've covered a lot already, and we're already a third of the way through. We've talked about what sports psychology is. We've talked about personality, and the personality core as being the most important part of personality, with typical responses and role-related behavior higher up on the pyramid. But a bit more superficial and extrinsic, whereas the psychological core is being the intrinsic, the inside of us, what makes us tick. And as a coach or as a teacher, we need to get inside that psychological core to truly understand our athletes and our students and our employees to help them really achieve some level of success. Well, we've moved on from there and talked about stress and anxiety. We talked about the stress cycle. We talked about competition versus cooperation. We had an interesting debate about whether winning is everything or just a part of the story. Well, I think both sides are right, and I really did appreciate your discussions in that area. Obviously, yesterday, the marathon, there were 50 or 60 people that hit Olympic qualifying mark. They didn't win the race, but they hit an Olympic qualifying mark. So I would say that is a very big win. One of my athletes who I got to pace yesterday, Chao Qin-Yan, she ran her first ever sub 250 marathon. Now, it's not quite the Olympic qualifying standard, but it was a huge lifetime best. And I would say that's a significant win. And in fact, she ended up with the very same medal that Patrick McCowan and Florence Kiplagat did. And in fact, somebody running a 5-hour or 6-hour marathon, that was a big win for them, getting to earn this significant medal. Well, moving ahead, we're about to get into such topics as leadership, group dynamics, talking about team cohesiveness, what I consider to be some of the macro issues in sports psychology. And we're going to keep coming back to things such as motivation, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. What do we need to do to really help an athlete be successful? Now, one of you in the class, many of you actually, talked about feedback and that being a huge motivating factor for athletes. And you're absolutely right. Some of you even mentioned the sandwich model. It's talked about in your textbook, and I believe it's even talked about in the PowerPoints for the class. But the sandwich model of positive feedback. Now notice I didn't say criticism. There's really no such thing as positive criticism. Criticism is defined as something that's really perceived to be negative. So if you want to be a really good coach and you really want to give positive feedback, try and use this sandwich model. It always begins with a positive statement. We can always find something positive that an athlete did on the field or a student did in the class or on an assignment, even if it was a really bad result or not necessarily a great piece of work. But we can find something positive to say. The second part, the meat of the sandwich, is our future-oriented instruction. What do we want our athlete or our student to get out of the experience moving ahead? What do we want them to learn? What do we want them to improve in the future? So again, I'm not saying criticism here. I'm saying future-oriented instruction, something to work on in the future. And then finally, we end the sandwich with another positive statement, something positive so the athlete or the student goes away feeling like they were successful. Here's a good example. Even though my athlete ran her fastest time ever yesterday, Chao Qin-Yan, again, getting very close to that Olympic standard. But she was a little disappointed with her time. But many positives. Obviously, the first thing, I'm celebrating a new lifetime best. I'm celebrating the fact that she had surgery on her left knee 4 months ago and is here in Berlin and had a top 40 finish in a major international marathon. So huge positives. Now, future-oriented instruction. She ran the first 10K much too fast and was actually way ahead of our suggested timeline for the race. So she got a little bit excited. And even though I'm there pacing her, she was pushing and pushing and pushing. So we talked about that. We talked about the importance of being more even paced as we go after the Olympic qualifying time. And then we end with another positive statement saying what a huge jump moving forward to our next race to be this far ahead of really where she should be coming off of surgery. So great use of the sandwich model of positive feedback there. And try it. All of you can use it. In fact, it's very effective in relationships too. So sometimes we can be very critical of our boyfriend or our spouse. Well, if we are more positive and then perhaps suggest a future-oriented instruction and use me words rather than you words, so use I feel or I this or I that rather than you, which can be put somewhere on the defensive, and then we end with something positive. Great way to offset any arguments you might have on the relationship side. Well, I'm really excited to have you all in class. I'm excited to learn from you. I've loved reading your discussion boards and your journal entries thus far. Keep up the good work. I'm about to return to Hong Kong finally after 3 weeks in Europe. So I've been in England and Scotland and Belgium and Italy, and I've obviously been in Russia last week, and now I'm in Germany. So I'm excited to get on a plane. I'm going through Finland on the way back, so that should be exciting. And looking forward to getting back with my family and working with some of the athletes who have obviously missed me since I've been away. So I wish you all the very best as we get into the second third of the class, and as always, if you have questions, then feel free to email me. As some of you have discovered, it's probably better sometimes to email me to the Hong Kong email address, because that's much easier for me to access than the Lindenwood address. So again, I wish you all the very best, and signing off from Belgium, good luck this week.